Today, I'll be showing you how to create a keyword voice chat so that certain sounds are played when players send specific messages. There will be a model of what I show in this video in the important links section of the description, which also has written instructions if it's easier for you. If anything shown in the video changes or does not work by the time you are watching this tutorial, please use the model from the description because I will update it to make sure that everything works properly. If you end up using it and have any feedback, make sure to let me know by posting a comment so I can continue making those better and easier for you to use in the future. During the video, we'll be creating everything from scratch, so first make sure you have the Explorer and Properties enabled from the View tab at the top left of the screen. You can also enable the toolbox if you would like to use it to search for audios that you prefer for use in this tutorial. I will also be showing you how to find audios directly through the Roblox website as well. From here, go on over to the Explorer, select the Server Script service, click the plus button next to it, and add a script inside. You can change the size of the text in the script editor by holding Control if you're on Windows or Command if you're on Mac and scrolling up or down. Once you have it at your preference, we can get rid of the text inside and get started. We are going to start by creating variables so that we can be more efficient when writing our code. So I'm going to start by saying local players is equal to game:getService, and inside the parentheses I'm going to add quotation marks and type in players. Here we are making a shorter word, which is players, equal to the service inside of the Explorer that contains a list of everyone in the game. We will be using this to activate a function whenever someone joins the game. But first, we need to create a table, or more specifically in this case a dictionary, that will contain a list of every single sound that you want players to be able to activate from sending certain messages in chat. So, in order to create this table, we are going to add these brackets here, and you can create these by holding Shift on your keyboard and clicking either one of these keys, which should be right below the plus or equal sign. From here, we want to move this closing bracket down a few lines so that we have room to write in our table, and I'm going to show you the format that we will be using. On the left side, inside of these brackets, we are going to put in quotation marks, and you want to type in the message that you want players to send in order to activate a certain sound. On the right side, we are going to have the sound ID that will be associated with that, so that whenever someone types in message, it'll play this sound. Now make sure that however you type in the word over here, this is exactly how you want players to type it in, the spelling and capitalization, but I will also be showing you a way that you can convert the player's message into lowercase only, so it'll disregard however they capitalize the word. If you would like to add more entries to this sound list, you can add a comma after the sound ID on the right side, and then you can move to the next line. So for the next one, I could type something like sword, and then I'll make it equal to a new sound ID. And in order to find these sound IDs, we need to go look for audio inside of the Roblox library. So from here, the first option you could do is going through the toolbox, clicking the picnic basket on the left side, selecting the models drop-down menu, and clicking on audio. From here at the very top, you will see a lot of Roblox uploaded audio, but you can still search for a specific one if you're looking for something else. Once you found one that you like, you can right-click it and click on, well, if it'll let me, right-click it and click View in Browser to be brought to the Roblox website. If you just want to search through the Roblox website instead, you can go down to Roblox, click the Create or Develop button at the top of the screen, then select Library at the top, and click on the Audio tab at the left side. Again, there is a search bar here if you would like to search for a certain audio, and at the bottom left you can also filter by a certain creator or player on Roblox if you only want to see audios uploaded by certain players. From here, select any audio that you would like to go to its page, and we can move on to the next step. Here you want to go to the web address bar that has the link to the page you're currently on, and find the string of numbers that appears inside of that link. You want to select it, right-click it, click on Copy, and then go back into Roblox Studio. On the right side, you want to replace this with that number, and right before it, we'll be typing RBX, asset ID, a colon, and 2 forward slashes. We are using this format so that we can directly change the ID of the sound whenever a player sends the right message into chat. So we're going to do the same thing with the second sound over here, so I'm going to go back to the website. I'm going to go grab this one, and then I will replace it on this line, so RBX asset ID, colon, 2 slashes, and then the number. I'm going to change this first one to GG because it is the victory sound effect, the old one that Roblox used to use for when you got a new badge. And now that we have that, we can create the first function. So first, I'm going to reference the players service that we created a variable for on line 1. So I'm going to start by saying players.playerAdded. So whenever a new player joins the game, they are added to the player service. This will be listening for that to happen so that we can connect it or activate it to a brand new function. When this function is activated from an event like this, it will send some data through into it. In this case, since a player is being added, we are able to reference the player that joined the game. I'm going to be labeling these ends also just so you know which one goes with which if-then statement or function or loop and etc. Now inside of this function, we are going to create another one that will create the sound for the player. So I'm going to create a function that we are going to call createSound. I'm going to add parentheses at the end, and then I'm going to hit enter so that whenever this function is activated, it knows where it needs to end. Now we need a way to activate this function. So I'm going to write another event, and I'm going to start by referencing the player that joined, and then we are going to listen for whenever their character is added into the game, so whenever they respawn in the workspace. So whenever their character is added, we are going to connect it to the function that is called createSound. And similarly, this will also pass data into the function that we connected it to, but in this case, it'll be the player's character. So we can reference their character inside of the createSound function. And we are doing this so that we can create a brand new sound. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a variable called sound, and I'm going to make it equal to instance.new. So we're creating a new object, and we are going to make it a sound object. We are going to rename it to player sound, and the different properties we can change next will be added right below it. And I'm going to show you these properties by adding one into the workspace. So I'm going to click the plus button next to the workspace. I'm going to type in sound, add one in, then I can select it and go over to the properties section. Now I'll have a resource in the important links section that covers all of the properties here, because I'm only going to go over some of the important ones that we'll be using. So to start, the looped property will determine if the sound will keep playing over and over again once it starts playing. So for this case, I'm going to make sure that the sound.looped property is set to false, so it is disabled. Next, we have the max distance property, and this will determine how far away from the sound it is able to be heard. So for example, if the sound is inside of the player's character here, and we set this value to something like 100, I believe it'll only be heard from 100 studs away from the sound. So if you wanted to, you could set this number really high so that it could be heard from anywhere on the map. But for this example, I'm going to keep it at 100. So I'm going to set sound.max distance to 100 so that you can hear later on that it will work on a proximity basis. Before we continue, Roblox released an update as I was editing this video to deprecate 2 of the properties, one of which we have used. So I'm going to show you the change that you could make to this function in order to be using the updated property. As we can see here, we are using the max distance property in order to determine how far away someone can be from the sound before they stop hearing it. So in this case, it would be 100 studs away, or about the distance from this part all the way over to the sign that says 100 studs. This is still something that you can use as it is backwards compatible, but it is not recommended to use anymore because they have replaced it with what is known as roll-off max distance. So it'll basically do the same thing. 100 studs away from wherever the sound is, you will no longer be able to hear it, or after 100 studs. In addition to this, they also replaced sound. I believe it was emitter size, which I'm not sure if it shows up here anymore. They have replaced that one with roll-off min distance. So the minimum distance you have to be away from the sound before it starts getting quieter. So for instance, if I set this one to 50, that means that anywhere 50 studs away from the sound, it will remain the same volume. So we have it set to 0.5 right here. That means that from here all the way up to 50 studs, it will remain at 0.5 volume until you get past this part. And then from here, it slowly starts fading out and becoming quieter and quieter until it reaches 100 studs. So make sure that you change the sound.maxDistance property to sound.rolloffMaxDistance. And I'll include some documentation in the important links section of the description that explains these further, and especially in the case that they change these again in the future. And if this was confusing, make sure to leave a comment down below. And now, back to the video I recorded 1 week ago, or 2 weeks ago. Afterwards, I'm going to make sure that we set its volume property. So I'm going to keep that at default, so I'm going to keep it at 0.5. So sound.volume is equal to 0.5. And after this, we are going to set the sound's parent, or whatever is containing it, into a certain part of the player. But before we do that, we need to reference a few more things. So I'm going to start here by saying local humanoid is equal to character, find first child of class, which is basically the category that something falls into. And inside the parentheses, I'm going to add humanoid. This is so that we are able to reference the humanoid root part. And this is something that every single character will have inside of Roblox. And that'll be the case no matter if you're an R6 or R15 or Arthro or any of those other character types, and potentially if Roblox adds any more. In this case, I'm going to reference the humanoid root part by saying humanoid dot root part. And the reason I'm doing this is just to account for any changes that Roblox may make in the future, because normally we would just look through the character for something called humanoid root part on the first layer. But just in case anything changes in the future, we are going to reference it this way so that it will locate the humanoid root part of the character no matter where it is. So instead, if you really wanted to, you could say something like character find first child, humanoid root part with no dot, and then it'll look for something inside of the character called humanoid root part. And again, make sure that you would add quotation marks around that as well. But for now, we are going to keep it like this. So then what we could do right after this is set the parent of the sound, or again, whatever is containing it, to that humanoid root part. So sound.parent is equal to humanoid root part. Now that we have this, we are going to create a function that will be activated whenever a player sends a message into chat. So I'm going to add that right after the character added function, or character added event. And I'm going to start here by saying player.chatted, so whenever they send a message, we are going to connect it to a brand new function. And because the function is activated whenever someone sends a message into chat, we are going to be able to reference the message they sent. So if I was to go into the game and say hi, then if I were to print this message into the output, it would say hi. Next, we are going to reference a few different things to make sure that we have everything before trying to activate the sound. So first, I am going to reference the player's character by saying player.character or player.character_added : wait with the parentheses at the end. And this is because this function could be activated even if the player's character does not exist yet, because you can type in chat even though your character has not respawned, for example. And after this, I am going to do the same thing with referencing the character's humanoid as well as humanoid root part. And this is because we are going to check to make sure these things exist, along with the sound that we parented to the humanoid root part. So right after this part, after these three references of the character, the humanoid, and the humanoid root part, we are going to check, okay, let's make sure that the character exists as well as the humanoid root part. So if character and humanoid root part, and I'm messing this up here, if character and humanoid root part exist, then we are going to continue and check for more things. So if this is the case, then we are going to try and reference the sound. So I'm going to say local sound is equal to humanoid root part, find first child of class, which is again the category that it's in, and I'm just going to type in here sound. So it'll try and look for anything inside of the humanoid root part that is a sound. If you happen to be inserting sounds into the humanoid root part that is unrelated to this tutorial, then I would suggest changing this to find first child and then putting the name of the sound, which in this case we set up to be player sound. And this is just so that it doesn't interfere with one another, because if there are two sounds inside of the humanoid root part, then it's just going to find the first one that's there instead of the one we created over here in this function. So just keep that in mind. So after this, we want to check to see if this sound exists. Or I guess in this case, the first thing we'll check for is if the sound does not exist. So if not sound, if the script is unable to find a child within the humanoid root part that is a sound, then we want to activate the create sound function and send the character through it so that a sound is properly created. And then after this, we are going to add an else to account for any other situation or condition that could be met. So if I add else here, this will run, or anything below it will run, if this condition up here is not met. So basically, whenever the sound exists, it'll run the code that we add over here. So here we are then going to check if sound, and if the sound is not playing, so if the is playing property is equal to false, then we can move on to the next line. And again, we could have put else if sound, so that this could have been an alternate condition that could have been met. But just in case you would like to add any alternate conditions, if you want to check for different things, then I will leave that up to you. All right, so now that we've gotten to this part, we can confirm that the sound exists and the sound is not playing. So now we are able to start looking through this table over here and comparing the player's message with what we have set up on the left side of the table. So I'm going to scroll down here and we are going to create a loop. So I'm going to start by saying for sound name, comma, audio ID in pairs, and inside of the parentheses, I'm going to add the name of the table, which is sound list. So what this is doing is that on the left, sound name is going to reference whatever is on the left side of the table, and audio ID is going to reference whatever is on the right side. It is referencing the key and value. But again, just for simplicity's sake, when we are looking through a dictionary, whatever we put on the left side will reference this, and whatever we put on the right side will reference that, what is on the right side of the equal sign. So then, because on the left side is the message that we want players to type in, or that they could type in, we want to check if the message that the player sent happens to be equal to the sound name on the left side, so that we can check if they match up. Now here's what you could add to this if-then statement as an optional addition. If you want to make the player's message lowercase, so that no matter if they type in sword with a capital S or not, or any other capitalization combinations, that it'll properly activate the sound. So we could go back down here and we can type in string.lower, and inside the parentheses, we can add that player's message. So this is going to convert every single character inside of the player's message to lowercase, and that'll make this more consistent. So now that we've checked if the player's message ends up matching one of the sound names that we put on the left side of the table, we can then set the sound ID property of the sound that we created to be equal to the audio ID that is linked with the message that the player inputted. So what'll happen is that the player will type in the chat, the script is going to check, okay, does their message match up with anything on the left side right here? If it does, the script will then access one of these IDs that we put on the right side, and it will swap it in as one of the properties of the sound that we created for the player's character. So then after that, what we could do is play the sound. So sound : play, and then we can add these parentheses afterwards. And now take note that with the system that we are using here, the sound will only play if the only thing in the player's message matches with this. So if I were to type something into the chat like swords with an S, that means that this sound would not be activated, even though the word sword is present in there. And now we could have used something else to account for this, which would look through the player's entire message and see if it found anything that matched with the term that we put on the left side, but it came to the point where someone would type something into the chat and it would be part of a much larger word that didn't make sense for the sound to be played, so I decided to stick with this instead, so that would be more intuitive and easier for you guys to understand. So now we have this, we can test it by going over into the game, clicking play at the top, and then we can send those messages into the game. So I'm going to make sure that my sound is up in here, so the volume is at this level. And I'm just going to type a random word that isn't in the list. So if I type hi, no sound is played, aside from the one that's played from my hat, but we'll ignore that for now. So if I go over here, I can type in GG or sword, and it'll play these sound IDs. So I'm going to say GG. And there we go, the glorious badge awarded sound from old Roblox. And the next one, if I type in sword, the sword sound will play. And just to show you that whenever one of these sounds are playing, you are unable to play the other one, I'm going to go here and copy the word sword so that I can say it while the other sound is going off. So, as you could see, I typed in GG, that sound was playing, and even though I typed in sword, which should activate the other sound, it did not play because the first sound effect was still going on. And that'll work the same vice versa, so if I were to type in sword, and then I type in GG right afterwards, it did not play the second sound because the first sound effect was playing. And now that we have that out of the way, let's add something into the system that will allow for you to have certain players who can play sounds that only they have access to. There will be a model of what I show in this video in the important links section of the description, which also has written instructions if it's easier for you. In this part of the video, we'll be editing what we created earlier at the timestamp on screen to also allow different players that you choose to have different sound effects that only they have access to. So as a quick rundown of what we've created, we have created a list of sounds that we have set up with the message on the left side that the player will need to type in, and on the right side will be the asset ID of the sound that you want to be played. In order to find one of these IDs, you can go down to the Roblox website, click Create at the top where it might say Develop, click Library, select the Audio tab at the left side, and you can search through as many audios on the website as you would like. Once you've found one that you want to use, go to its page, go to the web address bar that contains a link to wherever you are on the Roblox website, and copy the string of numbers that appears in the link. So we could select it, right-click it, and click Copy, and then we can go back into Roblox Studio. And that is the number that you would insert into this section, which is preceded by saying RBX asset ID with a colon and 2 slashes, because this is how the sound ID property of a sound instance in the game is set up. So if I were to click this over here, this sound, and I scroll down to the sound ID, this is what would go into that spot. So now that we understand that, let's create a new table, or we'll create 2 new tables to account for brand new things. So right below this first sound list, I'm going to create a new table that is called Allowed Players. Inside of this table, we are going to put the user IDs of players from the Roblox website who will be allowed to activate sounds in the table below it that we will call custom sounds. So in order to find the user ID of another player on the Roblox website, go down to Roblox, go to the profile of that player, and then go to the web address bar. You should see another string of numbers that appears there, similar to what we had for the page of audios, and you can copy that number and paste it into this table, which we will then be able to loop through later to check if that person, or if a person who sends a certain message happens to be one of the players in this list. So for now, I'm going to keep my user ID in here, and I'm also going to add a few others, so you can separate it with a comma to add another ID. So we could add Roblox here, and we'll just add 2 and 3. Then for the custom sounds table, we are going to structure it in the exact same way that we had this sound list up here. So I'm going to create a table, and I'm going to bring the closing bracket down a few lines. And in the left side, I'm going to create a new entry, so I'm going to call this one Shedletsky, and I'm going to make it equal to RBX asset ID colon 2 slashes. Then I'm going to go back to the Roblox website, go to the page of an ID, copy the number in the web address bar, and then paste it in after this. I'm going to do the same with another audio. So over here we have the paintball audio. I'm going to copy that number. I'm going to type in here paintball, and I'm going to make it equal to RBX asset ID colon 2 slashes and then that number. And again, you can also separate these entries with a comma at the end of it. So make sure you do that if you're having more than one inside of this table. So now that we have this, we need to make some adjustments to the function that we have below. So over here, this function is activated whenever a new player joins the game. And then we have some more inside that will account for the creation of the sound, which will be present inside of the player's character. And then below all of this, we have a function that is activated whenever someone types in the chat. So we want to be adjusting this section, and we're going to add it all the way down here after this loop ends. So we're going to take a look at the ends that I labeled over here. So this one ends this if-then statement, and this one ends the loop. So I'm going to add some more lines after the second end right here. And this is so that it will run completely separate from this one right here. And this is because we are going to check first if one of the players that sent a message happens to be within the table of allowed players. And this is so that the sounds in the custom sounds table that we created are only accessible to them. So the first thing we are going to do down here is loop through that allowed players table. I'm going to say for underscore, because we are not going to be referencing the index of this table. And I'll add a comma, and then I'm going to type in here allowed ID. So in this case, allowed ID is going to be able to reference any of the numbers inside of this table. So if we were to print it out, or print out everything inside the table, it would print out my user ID here, as well as 1, 2, and 3. So what we are going to do is loop through that table. So in order to do that, we are going to add in pairs, and inside the parentheses, we are going to add the name of that table, which is allowed players. And then for each one of the objects or values in there, we are going to do something. So the first thing that we are going to do here is check if the player that joined, so if that player's user ID is equal to one of the allowed IDs inside of the table, then we are going to move on and we are able to loop through the custom sounds table. And this will ensure that only players within this list will have access to it. So if one of the entries in that table matches up, then we can loop through the next table by saying for custom sound name :ID in pairs, and then the name of the table, which is custom sounds, we are going to do something else. And this is where we are going to do basically the exact same thing as we have up here. In this case, custom sound name is going to reference to the message that we want players to send in order for the sound with this ID to be played in the game. So if it's a little bit confusing, whatever you put on the left side will be able to reference the key over here, and whatever you put on the right side will be able to reference the audio ID we set up. So since we have Shedletsky on the left side here, if we were to refer to the custom sound name, one of those would be Shedletsky and the other would be Paintball. So now we could loop through that table, and we are going to check if that player's message matches up with any of the custom sound names that we set up on the left side. And similar to up here, if you want to convert the player's message to only lowercase, so that it doesn't matter how they type it, they just need to spell it correctly, then we can add string.lower to convert their message into lowercase. So we'll put message into parentheses. And if this condition was met as well, then we are going to set the ID of the sound to be made equal to the brand new ID that was associated with the custom sound name. And after that, we are going to play that sound inside of the game. And now again, as I said earlier in the video for the first section, just in case you didn't watch that, this is only going to account for instances where the player types in the exact same message. So in this case, if someone were to type in Shedletsky with like an apostrophe S afterwards, it would not play the sound because it doesn't match exactly. And this is because when I was planning for this tutorial, I tested it with other functions that would allow for the script to scan through the entire message of the player and see if anything matched with the keywords that we have set up, but it wasn't as intuitive and easy to understand. So I could always outline something in the description or maybe in the model itself that you could do if you want the system to function like that instead. So now that we've done this, I'm going to show you that these sounds up here at the top work as well as these ones. But first, I'm going to change my first listing of the table here so that it does not match my user ID, just to show you that these will not be able to be played in game unless the player's user ID matches with one from the table. So that means that I should be able to play the sounds associated with GG and Sword, but not Shedletsky and Paintball. And then afterwards, I'll remove the one there and we can test it to make sure that it works properly. So if I go over here, I'm going to type into chat Shedletsky. For the first one, did not play a sound, except for the one for my hat, but that's completely unrelated. But if I type in GG, it plays that sound effect. And if I try to type in Paintball, it will not play that one. So Paintball didn't play that one, but now if I type in Sword, that one ends up working. So I'm going to go back into the script. I'm going to remove the one here, and now I should be able to play these sounds in game. So I'm going to hit play at the top, and I'm going to start by typing Shedletsky into the chat. So, Shedletsky. And there we have Shedletsky's laugh. The other ones still work as well. And then in the last one, which is Paintball, That one ended up working too. So now that we've managed to do this, we are going to add one more variation to it, and that's going to be by allowing players of different teams to have sound effects that only players from each team are able to use. And maybe I explained that wrong, but don't worry, I'll explain it better in a few seconds. There will be a model of what I show in this video in the important link section of the description, which also has written instructions if it's easier for you. In this part of the video, we'll be editing what we created earlier at the timestamp on screen to instead allow separate teams to have different sound effects that they can play from one another. So before I explain how we set up a list of sounds and editing the function, we need to add a few more variables up at the top so that we are able to properly reference these new teams. So I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to create a new variable for the team service. So I'm going to say local teams is equal to game : get service, and inside the parentheses I'm going to add in teams. And what we are doing here is making the word teams equal to the service inside of the Explorer, which will show all of the teams that you have inside the game. So let's make sure that we have different teams that we can swap to make sure that what we create during this part of the video actually works. If you do not see a team service or folder inside of the Explorer, go over to the Model tab at the top left of the screen, click on the Service button, and you should be able to add it through this menu. Once you have that, let's click the plus button next to the Teams folder, and let's add in at least 3 teams. I'm going to call the first one Team 1, the second one Team 2, and the third one Team 3. I am then going to change the team color of these to different values. So the first one, I'll be setting it to be deep orange, the second one will be new yellow, and the third one will be medium green. So I'm going to change the team color property of these spawn points to match up with the ones we set up for each of those teams. So this one, I'll have it set to be deep orange, and I'll change the brick color of these as well, which is the physical color that you could see of the spawn point. So deep orange for both the team color and brick color. This one's already set up to be new yellow over here. And for the third one, we're going to change it to be medium green. So now that we have these, maybe I should choose these colors since I'm colorblind, but it's fine. Now that we have these, we can go back into the script and start adding a few more things. So we are going to create some brand new tables that'll have different lists of sounds for each team. So right below this sound list right here, we are going to add a few more. So I'm going to start by creating one for Team 1. So local Team 1 sounds, another one for local Team 2 sounds, and the third one for local Team 3 sounds. So we are going to make these equal to a brand new table, and then we are going to follow the same format that we had in here for each one of these. So on the left side, we have the message that the player will type into chat, and on the right, we have the audio ID of a sound from the Roblox library that will be played when a player sends this message, and I'll show you how to set this up in just a moment. So we're going to expand these tables here just so we can have room for everything, and then we will get started. So we're going to go down to the Roblox website now, click the Create tab at the top, or it might be Develop for you, select Library, then click on the Audio tab at the left side. From here you can search for an audio of choice, or select one that shows up right here, and then you can click on it to go to its page. Now that I have all of the different tabs for each of the teams set up, we could move on to the next step. So once you're on the page of one of these audios, go on over to the web address bar, which has a link to wherever you are on the Roblox website, and select the string of numbers that appears in the link. Once you've done that, you can right click it, click on copy, and then go back into Roblox Studio. Now on the left side, inside of brackets and quotation marks, you want to put the message that players will send to activate this certain sound. So in this case, I'm just going to have it be cheeseburger. And on the right side, I'm going to type in RBX asset ID, : 2 slashes, and then I'm going to paste in that number we got from the Roblox website. Afterward, I can add a comma to separate it from the next entry, and then I can add in another one. So I'm going to go back down to the Roblox website, follow the same process. So next one will be the rocket whoosh sound. Going to grab the audio ID from the web address bar. I'm going to paste it here. So I'm going to type in rocket for this one. I'm going to make it equal to RBX asset ID, : 2 slashes, and then this number. And then I'm going to follow the same process with all of the other sounds. So you can skip to the timestamp on screen if you don't want to see me go through all of these and add it in here. So this one was for another shoulder fired rocket. So I'm just going to call this one boom, or I'll just call it cannon, and I'll make it equal to this RBX asset ID, : 2 slashes, the number, add a comma. Then we'll go on over to the next one. We'll get the audio ID for this. We'll type in a word here, then add the next entry, and then we'll finally get all the way down to team 3, and we'll see what sounds we have there. So we have a spring sound, so I'll say spring, make it equal to RBX asset ID, and then we'll add in the very last sound here, and then we will be able to continue on. So this one was splat, RBX asset ID, :/, and then the number. So now we have all 3 of these tables filled. We need to go into the function down at the very bottom of the script and start adjusting it. So this function is activated whenever a new player joins the game, and then right away we have another function that is activated whenever someone respawns. It'll create a new sound for that player. But the most important part is all the way down here inside of the event that is activating a function whenever someone types in the chat. So what we're going to do here is add it in after this loop and this if-then statement. And this is because this is accounting for any message that a player sends that will match whatever is in the normal sound list, which is accessible to everyone no matter what team they're on. So we want to make sure we keep that intact. So I'm going to add it after the second end here, because these 2 ends are closing off this if-then statement as well as this loop. So we are just going to add some alternate conditions down below. So down here, we are going to add some if-then statements to check for different values. And in this case, we're going to be checking what team the player is on. So down here, I'm going to check if the player has a team in the first place, because they could be on a neutral team, and we want to make sure that the script doesn't error. So if the player has a team, and now we can check for the player's team name. And I guess I realized maybe we don't need this team service reference up here at the top, but we'll just keep it for right now. So if the player has a team, and the name of that player's team happens to be equal to team 1, then we can loop through the team 1 table and check if any of the messages they sent match up with what is provided there. However, we need to have some other conditions that will align with the other teams as well. So down here, I'm also going to check for the other teams. So if the player has a team and their player's team name is equal to team 2, and I'm going to do the same thing with team 3 as well. And I probably could have separated this so that we didn't repeat it so many times, but that is okay. So now we have this, we can have 3 separate conditions that will be looping through completely different tables. So let's start over here with the team 1 statement. So inside, we are going to start by looping through the table that we created. So I'm going to say for sound name, audio ID in pairs, and I'll put the name of the table inside of the parentheses. So in this case, it is team 1 sounds. We are going to do something. In this case, sound name is going to refer to the message that you want players to type in, and audio ID will reference the sound ID that we got from the Roblox website. And if it's a little bit easier for you to understand, whatever you put on the left side here is going to reference whatever is on the left side of the table, and whatever word was on the right side will reference what is on the right side of the table. So we can scroll back down here, and then for each one of those, we are going to check if that player's message is equal to any of the messages that we set up on the left side of the table. And now again, just like we did up here, if you want to convert the player's message into completely lowercase characters so that they don't have to worry about saying something with the proper capitalization, then we can type in string.lower and then add the message inside. And take note that again, this is also only going to account for instances where the player is typing in the exact message, so the same spelling, and they are not saying anything else in the message. This is because when I was planning this tutorial, I was testing to see how intuitive it would be with scanning through the player's entire message and seeing if anything they said matched with the keywords here. But there were some certain cases where one of the keywords inside of these tables ended up matching with one of the words they said, and it didn't really make a ton of sense. And of course, it is possible to add that and make it work properly, but it wasn't going to be something, again, that would be very intuitive to explain. So maybe I could cover it in a future tutorial or include some more info about it in the description. So for right now, we are just going to check if the message they sent matches the sound name that we set up. And if it does, we are then going to set the ID of the sound inside of the player to be made equal to the audio ID in the table. And afterwards, we can then play the sound. So now we have this, we can follow the exact same idea with the rest of these other statements. So I could basically just copy paste these into it and make the appropriate changes. So I'll paste it, I'll change this one over here to be team 2 sounds, and then same for this one, paste it, I'll change it to be team 3 sounds so that it loops through the correct table. I'll change these labels right here. And now we can go into the game and check if these work. So I'll be checking through each of those and showing you that you're only able to play the sounds either in the global sound list or the one for your team. So I'm going to go into the game. I'm going to make sure that these spawn points are not set to neutral so that I am properly put onto the team, and that the allow team change on touch property is also enabled. Do that for all of these, and yep, so now we can go into the game, hit play, and test it out. So I am on team 1. So I'm just going to start by saying something from one of the team 2 sounds lists. So I'll say cannon. Let's try that. And nothing played. I'm going to go over to the global list and I'm going to try one of these two. So I'll say GG. And that one ended up working. Now I'm going to try something from the team 1 sounds list. So I'll say cheeseburger. So we'll type in here cheeseburger. Oh, and it appears that I made a typo right there. So let me go back and fix it. So down here I actually typed in Sound ID instead of sound ID. So let me go fix that typo, and then we'll go test it one more time. So now that that typo is fixed, we can go back into the game and test it out. So I'll say GG, oops, GG, that one worked. And then now for team 1 sounds, we'll try cheeseburger again, cheeseburger, and that one ended up working. And then the next one, which is rocket, let's try that one. So a rocket, and there we have the rocket sound effect. And I'll keep on playing. And now when we swap teams, let's try sending the rocket sound effect again, or let's try activating it. And that one didn't end up working, but now when I try to activate one from this list, so I could say cannon, that one ends up working, and so does the other one. And you can, it's kind of hard to hear, but there you go. And the global sound list works as well. So if I swap over to the last theme, I can check again. So we have spring and splat. So let's try hit again. That one didn't work because it's for team 2. Spring, splat, then GG. That is from the global sound list. Let's try one from team 1 sounds. So we'll do rocket again. And as you can see, it didn't end up working, because that was meant for team 1. Now, since you've made it this far, post a comment down below to suggest what tutorial I should create next, along with any feedback about what I could do better to make these tutorials more enjoyable and easier for you to learn from. Remember to subscribe and check out my Roblox Studio tutorial series that will have dozens of other useful videos through the card at the top right of the screen or via the playlist in the description below. If you have any questions about this video, feel free to let me know as well, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. Anyway, with that, hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, night, or whatever time it is there. And I hope to see you next time. So, bye-bye.